I'm Justin Mott, and welcome to my home in Hanoi, Vietnam. And recently I had so much fun doing my episode where I talked about my 5 favorite and most influential gear purchases that I've made throughout my entire career as a photographer that I decided to take another trip down memory lane and do my 5 favorite non-gear purchases that have influenced my career as a photographer. And I'll also be sprinkling in some photography career advice for all of you out there that are interested in that kind of stuff. So if you want to take a trip down memory lane with me, stay tuned. Alright guys, as always, don't forget to check out my online store at justinmott.com where I've got one-on-one sessions starting as low as $99 for all of you out there interested in improving your photography, pros and amateurs, and all genres of photography. I've also got my presets starting as low as $4.99 that will not make you a better photographer, but they will add some popular images. And I've got prints starting as low as $99 with free shipping worldwide. So by the time you watch this, I should actually already be on my trip to Kenya documenting the last 2 northern white rhinos. So when I release this, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, if you want to follow me along, I'll be vlogging daily, so you can check that out on my Instagram at AskMott. Check that out. I'll also be doing some stuff on YouTube Stories, and then afterwards, I'll be doing a lot of content about that trip. So here are my top 5 purchases, non-gear related, that have influenced my career as a photographer. Starting out at number 1, it's really like without this, none of this would have happened. I don't know what this is, but this, well, none of the career probably would have happened if I didn't do this. My plane ticket from Rhode Island to San Francisco in about 1999. I was 21 years old. I wasn't going to college. I had just graduated high school. All my friends were off at college. I couldn't afford to go. My mom was a school teacher, raising 4 kids on her own. She couldn't pay for me to go to school. I didn't want to take out a big loan, so I was just kind of working. I was kind of hanging out. I was bored. I didn't have any direction in life, and my brother was living out in San Francisco, and he had been bugging me to move out there. He had a good job working in advertising. Kept putting it off, and then finally one day I'm like, let's do it. Let me do this. So I took him up on his offer to crash with him. I got a one-way ticket to San Francisco, and that changed my entire life. That really set the course for like my entire career as a photographer, because leaving that small town, going to San Francisco, going to a big city, going to a diverse city, just changed my outlook on life. I was crashing on my brother's couch. I went like door to door looking for a job bartending. I finally found a job bartending. I saved up money to go to school. I went to San Francisco State. I studied journalism, which led to me falling in love with photojournalism. That, to me, that's one of the most important purchases I ever made. That plane ticket, that one-way ticket, you know, it just opened up my eyes to a whole different world, opened up my eyes to a whole different city, a whole different way of living, and just gave me the confidence to say, like, yeah, I can do this. I can uproot. I can start over again. I can make it happen on my own. Of course, I had the help of my brother, which, thank you, Adam, if you happen to be watching this. But getting that confidence led to me having the confidence like, oh, I can be a photographer. I can make this work. Oh, I can be a photographer and live in Southeast Asia. I can move to Vietnam and make it work. So it kind of all started there for me. So that is number 1 on my list, my plane ticket, my one-way ticket from Rhode Island to San Francisco. And number 2 on my list is purchasing the entry fee into a documentary photography workshop in Cambodia by a famous conflict photographer named Gary Knight. Gary Knight is one of the founding members of an agency called Seven, and Seven also had one of my favorite photographers of all time, James Noctway. That's what that book is right there, by the way. It's by James Noctway. So if you don't know who James Noctway is, look him up. His work is amazing. It's had a huge impact on my career. So the way that workshop came about was kind of interesting. I won't go too deep into that story, but in about 2005, my father had passed away. My dad was living in Florida. We lived in Rhode Island. My mom really raised me, but I wanted some closure to my dad's death, and he had lived, don't worry, I'm not going to get like too deep and too sad here, but my dad grew up on a small island off the coast of Rhode Island called Block Island, and we have all these family roots there, and that's actually what this tattoo is there. That's a map of Block Island right there. And so I have this like strong attachment to that island. My family still goes there every year for our family reunion. A lot of my dad's family, like his half-brothers, and I have all these cousins I never met. And so after he passed away, I kind of wanted closure. And I always wanted to live on the island and work on the island, spend a summer there and see what that was like. Because even that's actually how my mom and dad originally met, on Block Island. So I was going to school at San Francisco State. After my father passed away, I said, all right, I'm going to take a break from school, going to take a break from my bartending job, and I'm going to get a job waiting tables and spend one summer on Block Island and work for the newspaper there as well. So I interned at the Block Island Times, which is, you know, imagine a tiny, tiny island, imagine that newspaper. So going from San Francisco and doing like pretty hardcore stories for school, and then going to Block Island and doing like stories about like, oh, they painted the beach pavilion. Go get a photo of that. Anyway. Anyway, so I was working that summer there, getting some experience, saving up money because I wanted to go on a trip. I wanted to travel to Southeast Asia after that. So I was saving up money to go to Cambodia and to Vietnam. And waiting tables, I got to meet a couple there. And couples there always come in. It's a very intimate setting and fine dining experience. So they always wanted to know about like your life. They're always talking to you about like, oh, what's it like living on an island? And so I was talking to this couple and I was telling them what I was doing. I was saying, oh, I'm working as a photographer. And the wife was like, well, my husband, he works for Time Magazine. I was like, whoa, really? She's like, yeah. And I got to talking to them and they had some cocktails. And by the end of the night, she was like kind of forcing him to give me his business card. And he kind of gave that polite like, oh, if you're ever in New York, come by and I'll show you around Time Magazine. And I was like, you shouldn't have said that because I'm going to take you up on an offer. He probably totally didn't expect me to take him up on an offer. And at the end of the summer, that's exactly what I did. I contacted him. I said, hey, remember you said if I'm ever in New York? So I made a trip to New York mainly for that reason. And I visited him and I brought some work with me. I really didn't have like a good body of work at that time. Definitely not work that was worthy of Time Magazine, but he said he'd show me around. He said he'd introduce me to editors. So I took a bump on the offer, came into the office, brought my portfolio with me. And he was showing me around a bit and he's like, all right, like doing like the polite thing. And then he's like, well, the photo editor's not in, she's off for lunch. And I'm like, oh, and just as I was leaving with that like disappointment, she was getting off the elevator and he's like, oh, Alice, this is the photographer. I was like, oh, okay. So she politely, it's all like a chain there. You could tell she didn't want to do it, but she was doing him a favor and he was doing his wife a favor because his wife was being polite. But hey, there's some life advice for you. If someone offers something, take them up on it. Be proactive. And so she met with me. She talked to me. She looked at my work. She politely went through. It was a lot of like foliage stuff. And I definitely wasn't like at time level. I was definitely at like Block Island Times level. But, she gave me an idea. She said, hey, Gary, you're going to be in Cambodia. You're going to be in Vietnam. Gary Knight, look him up. He's an excellent photographer and he does a workshop there. Check it out. I think it'd be worth your while. So I did. I looked it up. It was way out of my budget. It was like what it would cost me like a month to be there, and I was planning to go for 3 months, and I was on quite a tight budget. I was like all my savings from working in fine dining that summer, waiting tables. And I asked them if like they could give me a deal, and because I'm a student, and they did. It was really nice of them. They said don't mention it to anyone, but I think we're past the statute of limitations there, so I can say it. They gave me a deal, and that workshop really changed my life. At the time in school, I was like kind of ahead of the game. I was doing really well. I was like one of the go-to photographers at school, in a very competitive school. But when I went to this workshop, there was about 10 photographers, and I was easily the worst one. And Gary Knight like really kicked my butt. I mean, he was nice about it, but he kicked my butt. And I'll just never forget that experience. It was a really good wake-up call for me to say, hey, if I want to work internationally, like even the other photographers in the workshop, they weren't even like wanting to be pros. Not many of them. Some of them maybe, but most of them were just doing it for fun, which is fine. But I wanted to be a professional, and they were better than me. So I was like, wow, this is a real good wake-up call on what I need to do and what it takes. And then afterwards, when I had work that I felt really good about, and then I shared it with Gary, and I just said, hey, this is the work I did. I just wanted to thank you. I appreciate what, I appreciate the kick in the butt. I appreciate your workshop. I appreciate the deal. And he's like, listen, this work is good. It was the work I did about victims of Agent Orange. And he's like, it's really good, Justin. He was like genuinely impressed. He's like, listen, I tell you what. He's like, email this editor at Newsweek, put my name in the subject line, and they'll open it at least, and you'll have a shot, and they'll look at it at least because of my name, which was really nice of him. A little cocky, but nice, but it worked. They did open it, and they bought the story, and that was like my first personal project ever published in a major magazine. So that workshop taught me so much. I've talked about this before about workshops in general, but like go to workshops. If you're gonna do a workshop, find a teacher that's not teaching you how to be like a version of them. Go to a workshop that's going to teach you how to develop your own style and be a better version of you. And that's what Gary did. So number 2 is purchasing the entry fee to a workshop by Gary Knight. And number 3 on my list was paying for a charitable exhibition here in Hanoi. So shortly after my workshop, within the next couple years or so, I kept going back and forth between Vietnam and San Francisco, I kept finding myself drawn to living here in Vietnam. So I had done my story about third-generation victims of Agent Orange, about an orphanage here in the north of Vietnam. I'd done a multimedia piece about that. And then I started to do a more focused story. I met a little girl named Nu. She was about 9 years old at the time. She's autistic, she's blind, she's mostly deaf, she can hear just a little bit, and she can't really communicate with people. So I did a story about Nu and about her life of isolation. I spent a lot of time in that story, and that was that was a long time ago, like 15 years ago. But while I was working on the story with her, I realized that the kids staying at this orphanage couldn't stay there for more than 5 years. It was kind of like a vocational orphanage. And she had her parents, but they'd split. She had her grandparents, but they were very old, so no one really could take care of her. No one wanted to take care of her. But the orphanage was telling us that she was going to have to move out. So I decided to, with a friend here, luckily I had a great friend here, great contact here. She was in charge of the English department of a very influential school. So with what little money I had at the time and with the help of a lot of friends, we did an exhibition. We did a charitable event. So I printed up all these different images of her story. I also printed up images that people could buy for auction, and we raised thousands of dollars. It was just an amazing night, and I can't take credit for it myself, but couldn't have done any of this without the help of a bunch of different people. But we had a great night, a great exhibition, and now 15 years later, that money has still kept her at that orphanage. Every year, we still take New back to her grandparents' house for Tet holiday and pick her up and bring her back. And staying at the center, she gets medical care, she gets nurture, she gets food, she gets everything she needs. And that to me was important because not just because we help New, but also just reassured the fact to me that photography can make a difference and that your images, even if it's not a conventional way, like, oh, people see it in the news and then people react and then policy change. This was just a less conventional way, but a simplified way of like, oh, images can have power, images can help. You can use them for a good cause. So that had a huge influence on my life, a huge influence on my career. Still to this day, still go see her, like I said, every single year. She's still living at the orphanage thanks to all the generous donations from that charitable exhibition a very, very long time ago. So that is number 3 on my list. And number 4 on my list is putting down the deposit for an apartment that I couldn't really afford, but my first ever like really, really nice apartment here in Vietnam. I had been living in some pretty crappy places throughout my life here in Vietnam. I was traveling a lot, so I never needed a place that was really nice, but I was living in places that ranged from like $100 a month to $250 a month. Now, that does go a long way here in Vietnam, but I had cockroaches, I had bad neighbors, I dealt with everything for a long time. And finally, I was like, listen, I could afford a little bit more. And I started looking around, and I came across this beautiful empty space. And I was like, well, this is interesting. It was way out of my price range. It was about like $1,500. So I was going from a place that was $250 to $1,500. Now I definitely could afford more than $250 at the time, but I was an assignment photographer. Every month was different. I was starting to do a little more commercial work, but not fully into the commercial work yet. I was mainly doing the assignment stuff. And I just thought, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna put a deposit on this place. It has enough space where I can have a proper office. I can start to build my team. I can start to build my commercial business, Mott Visuals. This will like kickstart me to do this stuff. Knowing that I have to earn this money to pay for this every month, I'm gonna bet on myself. And I did. And I put a deposit down and I started to build Mott Visuals, and I had my first real proper apartment, which I really, really liked. My apartment actually just before this place here. And another big moment for that was that's the first apartment ever that my girlfriend at the time and now my wife had actually lived with me at. So that's a huge step for me as well. I hadn't living with my girlfriend at the time, who you start to see a little bit more on my YouTube channel in my vlog episodes. You'll see if you're following me in Kenya, she's with me doing a lot of the BTS stuff. And that was a big step too, because first, not only did she move in with me, then she really joined Mott Visuals. And then she really helped me take Mott Visuals to the next level. And now like Mott Visuals is nothing without her. I could leave and they'll be fine. But that was a huge moment. That changed everything for me. Moving into that apartment, moving into a place I couldn't afford. I don't encourage that for everyone, but you will see a theme here, like in my entire career, like taking these chances and betting on yourself. And that's what I did. I said, listen, that's gonna kickstart me to do more commercial work, to really focus more on my commercial business, to really treat myself as a business, as a photographer. And it worked. That jump-started my career. Yes, had a proper office in there. My wife later joined the team. Then my wife took, like I said again, my wife took the business to the next level with full-on production, doing models, doing video production, everything, like big shoots, something I would never, ever do without her. So that is number 4, the deposit from my first ever real apartment, which evolved into me really taking my Mott Visuals business to the next level. And that brings me to number 5 on my list, which was hiring someone to help me with my branding, to figure out what to do with my destination wedding photography business, my freelance business as an independent photojournalist, and then my commercial photography business, Mott Visuals, as well. The way this came about was in a very unconventional way. I was passing through Bangkok, staying with a friend of mine who's a writer for the New York Times, who became friends. We became friends from working with each other. He became my mentor. I was passing from one assignment in the countryside of Thailand back through Bangkok before coming back to Hanoi. And I used to crash with them whenever I was in Bangkok. And when I was crashing with them, when I was passing back, I had a long assignment, really tired, filed everything, and like a long drive back to the city. And I was just gonna like put my bag in my room and go to bed and just like say hello in the morning and fly out the next day. Because I was just exhausted. It was just like some photo shoots can be like really, really exhausting, and that was one. And they were having a party. And during that party, they introduced me to 2 wonderful people that had a huge effect on my commercial photography business. And that is Pika and Jamie. They were 2 young graphic designers living in New York City, working for big ad firms, working for big clients. And yeah, I decided to like, all right, I'm gonna be social. So I I took a shower. So I took a shower, I joined the party, talked to them all night long, a lot of wine, a lot of cocktails, talked to them all night long about my branding. I was really struggling with trying to figure out how to do I separate my businesses as a commercial photographer, as a photojournalist, as a wedding photographer? How do I put this all together? They just had some great ideas and I was just so intrigued by that. I was bothering them all night long about it. Then the next day, it just kind of stayed with me. I had a great time talking to them as just people, as individuals, but I learned so much from them as well. Again, just one night. And I remember a week later, I was just I need to reach out to these guys. I can't afford them. There's no way I can afford them. I don't even know if they do this kind of work, but I reached out to them. I reached out to Jamie and I was like, hey, I just want to thank you again for all the information. Sorry if I bugged you too much about that stuff, but it was really, really helpful. And I said, listen, if you have any advice moving forward, I know I can't afford to hire you guys. It's just not at that stage in my career right now where I can. I know I benefit from it, but I just don't have the money right now. But any advice you have, I'll take it. Any direction you want to point me in, I'll go. And he got back to me. He's like, listen, we were impacted by a conversation with you too. We love your passion for photography. So that sparked us to look up your work, and we're really impressed with your wedding work. And he was like, listen, I tell you what. He's like, I'll just be transparent with you. He's like, I'm gonna ask Pika to marry me one day, and probably in the next year or two. He's like, I'll do your branding stuff to a certain extent. I'll do it for a certain amount of time, and just make a promise with me. He's like, make a promise that when we get married, you'll shoot our wedding. And I said, fine. And they did all my branding, and they really just helped me separate my businesses, helped me come up with an identity for my business, helped me produce the coolest business card I've ever seen. I love my business cards. I should show you one right now. I'll put one up on the screen. But it was more than that. It was more than just a collateral, more than just a brand. They really just helped me think. They asked great questions that forced me to think about how to separate my businesses, how to separate my websites, how to use one to influence the other. It's just a whole different way of thinking. And at the time, yes, it seems normal. I think about that stuff now, but I wasn't thinking that way. I wasn't thinking about what's different about my business, what's different about my background, what's different about my experience, what's different about my style of work, and then all of that, and then how to sell it. Now, they didn't give me all the answers to those questions, but they helped me even think of those questions, which I didn't have at the time. I just wasn't doing that. And that just forced me to look deeply inside myself to really understand my photography, really understand my businesses, really understand how to separate each businesses and how to sell each business and how to have them even work together. That experience paid for itself exponentially. A couple years later, when they got married, I flew to South Dakota, I shot their wedding, and I loved it. It was easy for me to do. I definitely owe them 10 weddings. Hopefully they don't have to get married 10 times. It was well worth it for me just from a business standpoint, but just as friends, there's just such nice people. They've helped me with so many things throughout my entire career as a photographer. They forced me to think differently. They taught me the importance of branding. They taught me the importance of marketing. They taught me the importance of how to sell myself. They kind of really did everything for me. So shooting their wedding once, no problem whatsoever. I do it 10 times over. I really can't thank them enough, and that's a huge reason why my commercial business is at where it's at today, because of them. So in conclusion here, the basic advice is move to San Francisco, then go back to New York, show up at the doorstep of Time Magazine, take a workshop, then move to Vietnam. That's the formula. No, that's not the advice. The advice here is to take chances in your career. Buy that plane ticket, go on that adventure you've been putting off, bet on yourself. If you really want to make this work as a photographer, commit to it. Realize there's gonna be ups and downs. Realize it is going to take time. Collaborate with good people, do good things with your work, and good things will happen to you, and you'll be just fine. That's my advice for today. That's a little background about my career as a photographer. Those are my 5 favorite non-gear purchases that I've made throughout my entire career as a photographer. I'd love to hear yours. You can put those in the comment section. Thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to check out my online store at justinmott.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to have a wonderful day.